Welcome to tonight's a special meeting. We actually have invited Anne here to be the main content of tonight, and we'll get into that a little bit more. You've seen all the advertisements for tonight. We're going to talk about study skills, but before we go into that, I wanted to talk a little bit about some upcoming events, some that are coming up really soon. So we have Family Bingo Night. And so this will be, I think it's going to be a co-sponsored event between the PTSA and the EL group of parents. And so if anybody would like to volunteer to help us set up, feel free to email us. Otherwise, we will be sending out information, and it will be a free event for everyone to come, and there will be prizes and food. All right, we also have the Kenmore 5K, which is happening on May 6th. So eventually we're going to need runners. But if you are able to help us with fundraising, or you would like to sponsor the event, if you could also let us know, that would be. All right, then we have Teacher Appreciation, which is on the week of May 8th through the 12th. And we'll have daily activities. And if you have ideas or would like to participate, we also would love to hear ideas from you. We will be planning a spring movie festival. And then at the end of the year, we'll be having our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade promotion celebrations. So that is it for me for now. And what I want to do is I want to turn it over to Anne, who is our guest speaker. So Ann Dolin has actually nearly 30 years of experience working with students, and she's developed really practical strategies that she shares to help kids succeed and to make the most of their academic journey. So she's a former school teacher and an author, and she also founded the Educational Connections in 1998, which is a company that specializes in helping students build executive function skills, which sounds very fancy, Anne. You'll have to describe that to us. And to form study habits so that they can perform better in the school and ultimately in college. So her company, she runs a team of 120 tutors, coaches, and college consultants. And she's also author of an award-winning book called Homework Made Simple: Tips, Tools, and Solutions for Stress-Free Homework. And her latest book called Getting Past Procrastination. That would be me. Maybe I should read that. How to get your kids organized, focused, and motivated without being the bad guy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anne.
No, thank you so much. It's great to be here tonight, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for throwing in your thoughts into the chat. I'm going to come back to those in just a second. But as Na said, this evening we're talking about study skills and organization and helping kids build better habits and confidence while they're in middle school, so they have those skills for high school, and then again later in college. So Na mentioned the word executive functions, and she said, that sounds kind of fancy. It is a fancy term. It's kind of like I'd say it's like a hot topic. It's a hot, trendy word in the last 20 years in education. But to me, it's kind of like a fancy term for really good study habits. Now, some kids have naturally good study habits and other kids not so much. So let's talk about what these study habits are in the first place. Really, they're called executive functions, and they're actually these mental capacities in the frontal lobe of your brain, right behind your forehead. And, it's interesting because these skills, which, by the way, your frontal lobe is the last part of brain development to come online. And that's why we see, when kids are young, they don't really have great executive function skills. But as they get older, they have better ones. And in fact, we know this part of your brain isn't fully developed until you're in about your mid-20s. But these skills really can make it or break it in school. So let me explain what they are before we get started on the content tonight. They have to do with organizing and prioritizing. So if you think as a student, oh, I've got 3 assignments to do, can you organize your stuff? Can you prioritize them? And then can you activate your energy to get started on that task? That's an executive function skill. Can you focus long enough to get the work done? Also an executive function skill. Are you able to regulate your alertness and know that, oh, wow, at this pace, I'm going too slowly to finish this? Can you manage your frustration, especially when something's really hard or you don't want to do it? Can you utilize your working memory? And your working memory isn't actually your short term or your long term. It's your brain's ability to juggle multiple things in your head at the same time. Working memory is, really synonymous for things that require lots of steps like writing and math. And then lastly, can you monitor your behavior? Meaning, let's say you're doing your homework and, an hour later you realize you haven't been doing your homework. You've actually been watching YouTube for an hour. Can you kind of self-correct and say, oh, it's not a good idea to watch these videos. It's really interfering. Can you stop that behavior and start what you should be doing? So all these things are frontal lobe abilities called executive functions. Now, as I mentioned, some people naturally are good at these things and some people, they're really a struggle. To me, it doesn't matter whether you are struggling just a little bit or a whole lot, whether you have a diagnosis maybe of ADHD or you don't. I want to share strategies that can still help kids. Sometimes parents say, well, the things you've talked about tonight kind of make me think about an attention problem. If my child's struggling in this area, could that my child maybe have ADHD? What is the difference? So let me explain. So everybody that has a diagnosis of ADHD, which by the way means attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it's the same thing as ADD. In fact, we don't use the term ADD anymore. Everybody with this is categorized as ADHD. Everybody with ADHD has weak executive function skills, but not everybody with weak executive function skills meets the clinical diagnosis of ADHD. So again, really, if your student is struggling, you want to take action. And here's the reason. Good study habits, if you can help your child develop good study habits, or hire it out so somebody else can help your child, good study habits are the equalizer, even if these things are difficult. So tonight, I want to talk about how you as a parent can make a difference. And let's start out with kind of like the basics when it comes to doing homework. Before the pandemic, when I used to work with kids in their homes, I would see that kids generally had a place to do their work. But then during COVID, it seemed like that place migrated to their bed. But really, we know from lots of research that kids should have a dedicated place to do homework, should not be on their bed. Ideally, it's a desk and a chair that they're sitting doing their work. They can also have things like noise canceling headphones if they do work in kind of like a busy place in your home, even a kitchen table. That's fine too, as long as they can be productive. So the ideal place really should have reduced distractions, if at all possible. We wouldn't want our kids doing homework in the same room where the TV is blaring, because that would be distracting. Usually it's maybe the dining room table, or if you have a home office, that might be a good place too. And if it is a student's bedroom, and as kids get older, that's where they want to do their work, they should ideally have a desk set up. I don't really care. Parents always say, oh, their room's a mess. I get it. But really, as much as possible, the desk should be somewhat organized so they can have a place to do their work. Now, ideally, we want kids to get into a routine too. Once they have a place, getting started is really important in terms of timing. Usually at this time of year, things look kind of different than they did at the beginning of the year. In September, August, we all have like great intentions. This is going to be the year we're organized. And then as the year goes by, just naturally people get tired. Kids are tired. Parents are tired. Some of the structure that we initially had developed at the beginning of the year has gone by the wayside. So what I propose is, bringing that routine back. It's okay to say, all right, let's readjust things. We're getting to the end. We only have a couple more months left of school. So that might be really a routine for getting started. About what time is homework going to start? Ideally before dinner. For kids that are involved in sports, maybe right after dinner. But again, as kids get older, they want to start later and later. And we want them to start a bit earlier so they can get done with their work earlier. We've also found that for many of our kids, having an action item list is better than just like this really long to-do list. So we might say to them, okay, tell me what you have. Let's take a look at your homework portal. I'll talk about that in a minute. And we have them go through their portal and see what they have due. Now, in most portals, the assignment will populate to their calendar, which is fabulous. But what doesn't happen is if they've got a test on Friday or a project due on Friday, it doesn't say, oh, this is due on Friday. What are going to be those little steps leading up into it? So we help kids with a skill called calendaring. It doesn't mean that you have to help your child, but you can ask questions like, oh, you have that test due on Friday. What might you do? Test on Friday. What might you do to prepare for it? So we have kids take that big thing and break it up into smaller parts and put that into their calendar, like these little mini due dates into their calendar. Again, this skill is called calendaring. So having a place to do work, having a routine in terms of when work starts, and making sure kids know what they're going to do. These are all helpful things. When it comes to organization, there's also things we can do as a parent. And ideally, we're helping our kids get ready the night before for what's going to happen in the morning. In many households, it's just so easy to, and it's normal for mornings to be super hectic and sometimes for people to feel stressed out. But you can really make a difference in your mornings by preparing the night before. And this is something called a launching pad. It's really simple. Like a launching pad is a bin, it's a box, it's really anything. It's a container by the door from which your child exits in the morning. And the idea is that your child is putting everything they need for the next day into the launching pad the night before. So in the morning, they're kind of launching into a new day in an organized fashion. They're not running around, oh my gosh, where is that book? Where's my laptop? Oh my gosh, I have soccer after school. I totally forgot I need to get all my stuff. It's all packed away the night before. In my house, when my kids were younger, one's graduated from college, one's in college. Our house was set up where we didn't really, the door from which they exited wasn't really visible from where our lives happened, which was really in the kitchen, but we did have this kitchen island. So it was kind of like our routine that at night, when they got done with their work, one of my kids had one corner of the island, the other had the other corner, and they just put their stuff there. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's just a routine that they get in. Another thing you can do to help kids preview the week, and I will generally say that kids that have weak executive function skills or weak study habits are not planners. They kind of do things spur of the moment. They sometimes don't know what they have to do until it's kind of late in the game. So one thing that helps with this is saying to them, hey, let's look at your week ahead. Let me share with you this calendar that I have. And here, I'll give you in just a second the link so that you can download it if you want. I found a lot of success using this for younger students, definitely elementary, but it can also be used for middle schoolers. I'll show you another thing specifically for older students in just a second. But the idea is on Sunday night, you're having a conversation about the week. So you're saying, hey, everybody, let's get together. I call this the Sunday session. Let's talk about the week ahead. What do you have going on? Do you have any big projects or quizzes? Can you take a look at your week ahead? So this is a sign to your child. Okay, open up your laptop, go onto Canvas or whatever their portal is, and see what they have coming up this week. So that's a good time for everybody to prepare. Oh, I forgot, I have this tomorrow. Let me start doing that now. Oh, hey, mom, by the way, I have to stay after school on Wednesday. These are all good discussions to have before the week actually gets started. Now, for younger kids, as I mentioned, what I often have those kids do, because they don't have much homework, is to talk about extracurriculars and to plan their week ahead and to say, let's talk about what you have coming up this week. So that can go onto a weekly calendar. And it looks like this. You can download it by going to our website, which is ectutoring.com/Sunday-sessions. And this, again, is a discussion with younger kids, and you or they can put their after school commitments onto the calendar. So you're previewing it. Anytime you preview with your kids and they know what to expect, they're less likely to push back and say things like, you didn't tell me that. I didn't know that. Oh, my teacher never said that. It's usually in their portal or it's somewhere that they know what's coming up. And then again, for older kids, asking them, open up your laptop. Let's take a look. What do you have? And they can check their calendar. All right, so those are good things to do for thinking about the week ahead, for setting up routines after school. But let's talk a little bit about study strategies, because you can be pretty organized and you can have a good sense of time management. But if you don't know how to study well, it's still hard for you to earn optimal grades. I love learning about study habits. And I think for kids that struggle to be organized, to plan their time, study habits can be that great equalizer, because, what often kids will do, even, seemingly good students, is they think they can study by just reading their notes the night before a quiz or a test. But that's not actually true. As the work gets harder and harder through middle school and definitely high school, you have to know what is the way in which your brain really works to retain information best. And there's a really, really great website called learningscientist.org, which I love. And it's a website for teachers, for kids, and for parents. And it really boils down the research into how kids learn best. And there are a number of study strategies, but I will share the top two with you to save you the energy of sifting through everything. And the first one is called this concept of distributed practice. And what we know is that the brain can remember things at the last minute. So if you have a test on Friday and you study for an hour on Thursday night, that's fine. You'll probably do okay the test the next day. But what you won't do so well with is remembering that information later on for a unit test, a midterm, or a final exam, because you've crammed. And what we know is if you take that hour and you distribute it in little bursts over time, you're going to remember it better later on. So you take that hour and you say, I'm going to practice for 20 minutes Tuesday, 20 minutes Wednesday, 20 minutes Thursday. You're going to do a lot better later on. So it's also called spaced practice. And we know it is superior to massed practice, as a researcher from Dartmouth shared in this quote, for long-term retention. Now, distributed practice is really important, but so is taking what you need to do and breaking it up over time, as I mentioned, into meaningful chunks. So when we work with kids on executive function skills, we help them take big assignments and distribute them into smaller chunks in their calendar. But we also talk to kids in terms of, like, how long do you think this assignment is going to take? And what I found over many years, I was a teacher in Fairfax County Public Schools, and now I've had educational connections. In fact, this month is 25 years that I've had the company, and my team of tutors and coaches and I have been helping kids with all skills for a long time. But what we found is that when you have weak executive function skills, you often underestimate how long it's going to take you to do a test, and you overestimate how much time you have. And that's why kids, they wait till the last minute, but when they wait to the last minute, often the thing they have to do takes them longer than they thought. So we talk to kids in terms of like, how much time do you think that is going to take you? And we like to really link it to food, because who doesn't love food? And it's meaningful to kids. So we'll say to kids, oh, this assignment, is it a bite? Is it a muncher or a gobbler? So a bite is something that doesn't take that much time at all. It's maybe reviewing your spelling words if you're in elementary school. If you're in middle school, it might be practicing 5 words in Quizlet, or asking your teacher, emailing your teacher about something. A muncher is something that might take longer, about 30 minutes. Maybe you need to go over your Cornell notes for a history test coming up, or you have a math assignment due. And then a gobbler is something that takes a long time. It could be an audiovisual project you have to turn in, a book report. It could be an essay that requires research. So we'll say, oh, is it a muncher? About how long do you think it will take you to do that? We also help kids put these little chunks of time into their calendar. So, okay, you've got that vocabulary quiz. Is it a muncher, a gobbler, or is it a bite? What do you think? And then let's take that and put that into your calendar. We call this time mapping. And for some kids that are really, really weak in this skill, we go to this extra measure and we have them write it all down first before we help them put it in their calendar. Now, not every student needs this, but I'm just showing you this because for some kids, they almost have to relearn what they haven't been doing well for many years. So that's planning out your time and estimating your time. In middle school, we really hope that kids are going to be good note takers. This is a skill that's so important. If you can get this right in middle school, it makes your life a lot easier in high school and college. And what I found is that often teachers will teach kids, okay, this is how you take notes. All right, got it, good. But kids don't practice it enough over time to really own it. So this is one note system. There's a gazillion ways to take notes. I found this system to be really, really beneficial for kids. It's called the Cornell note-taking system. But honestly, whatever the student is willing to do is the best. Because if they say, I won't do this, but I will do this, I want to go with what you will do. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how you take notes. It matters that you will take notes, and more importantly, what you're going to do with the notes after you take them. So with Cornell notes, what we have kids do is if they're taking notes online, they take there's actually this paper that you can pull up. It's like a Word document, or it could be a Google Doc, and it has the paper divided for them. So on the left is like the concept that they're learning. It's called a Q. The causes of the Revolutionary War, or maybe it's mitosis, whatever. And then on the right is all your notes about that thing, about that concept. And then once you take your notes, at the end, you want to say to yourself, okay, what's important here? Let me write a quick summary of what I've learned about. It is this concept of summarizing things for your brain, which is actually kind of a hard thing, that makes your brain synthesize the information. And when you put it down after you take notes, it's really powerful. It's a really good retention tool. So it's an effective note-taking system. It allows your notes to become a study guide, which I'll show you in a second. And ultimately, for kids, this is a way for them to study for a later test, because it will look like this. And this way, you fold over the note part and you're asking yourself the question on the left. Okay, how do nutrients and energy move through an ecosystem? And you ask yourself that question, you should be able to answer it. And if you can't, then you flip your paper over on the other side. If this is online, you ask yourself the question, you cover it up, and then you look at the answer. So it is this it's this way of taxing your brain, asking your brain questions that really help you retain information. The other study habit that's really, really important is kind of piggybacking on this, and it's called self-testing. So I mentioned the learning scientist, and I said there are two ways of retention. One is distributed practice, breaking things into smaller chunks, and the other one is self-testing. And it is actually this skill that trumps distributed practice. So basically what you're going to do with self-testing is asking yourself the questions. Self-testing is the Cornell notes. You're covering them. You're asking yourself, what were the causes of the Revolutionary War? You're kind of testing yourself on the material. You can also do it if the teacher gives you a study guide. We have our students make 2 additional copies. So they have a study guide that they've usually filled in class. But research shows if you take that study guide and you fill it out again from memory, not by looking at the first one, but just racking your brain. What was that answer? Filling it out best you can the next night, and then looking back when you're totally stumped, and doing that again. That is a phenomenal way of self-testing that will help you do better on the test. We also help kids, if the teacher doesn't give them a study guide, to create their own. This is the best way to study math, by the way. And then we also help kids use Quizlet correctly. A lot of kids use Quizlet, but they often take somebody else's flashcard deck, but they should be creating their own or using maybe half and half. That will help them remember too. Another really great study habit is using a timer. I'm a huge believer in timers. I've used them for kids in kindergarten. I've used them for kids in college. I use them for myself as an adult. Timers are fabulous. We share with kids all the time, like, hey, if you're on Instagram or you're on Snapchat or you're on TikTok and you've also got to do this math homework, it's not your fault when it's hard to peel yourself away from TikTok. Your brain loves TikTok. TikTok is passive, it's easy, it feels good. Whereas your brain is saying to you, no, don't do the math. That's hard, it's arduous, it's no fun. So no wonder we procrastinate when we have to do something hard. Our brain is telling us, don't do that, don't do this, do that, right? But a timer can really help you. So a timer is this external device when you don't have that internal umph. And you set it for a super short period of time, like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And you say to yourself, and you repeat this mantra, I'm going to work as hard as I can, focus as much as I can, do the best I can for just 5 minutes. And then I can take a break if I need to. So setting that timer just for a short period of time can trick your brain into thinking that this math, isn't that hard after all. So that can get you going. There's also research that shows when you're working independently and something feels hard for you, you don't want to do it, but it can't be just that you do it for 5 minutes. You've got to do this project, this assignment for a longer period of time, that actually 25 minutes is the sweet spot for attention. It's not 10, it's not an hour, it's not an hour and a half, it's 25 minutes. You can also set your timer for 25 minutes and repeat the same mantra. I'm going to work as hard as I can, best I can, but as much as I can, just for 25 minutes. And then I'll take a break. So this is called the Pomodoro method, and you can read about it online. But the Pomodoro method is based on research from an Italian educator in the 80s who looked at these time commitments for kids and found that 25 minutes is a sweet spot. So here's what we know about Pomodoro. You want to use a Pomodoro and then take a 5-minute break. If you're able to, you want to set the timer again for another Pomodoro. So for most middle schoolers, they can tolerate a Pomodoro and a break and another Pomodoro, sometimes just one Pomodoro. But for older kids, they can tolerate Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro. They can actually tolerate 4 Pomodoros, and then the brain is typically spent. So that strategy works great for older kids and for college students. Now, all this might sound great to you, but you might be thinking, okay, what if my kid is resistant to studying? Now, it's easy to think when kids are resistant that they're just lazy, they're unmotivated, or they simply do not like studying or do not like school. But the reality is, if we peel back the layers of the onion, there's typically something else going on. Sometimes kids feel overwhelmed. They don't know how to do it, and they feel like this is just too much to think about. They might feel underprepared. They could feel overwhelmed and underprepared. Sometimes kids are also perfectionists, and they procrastinate because they're worried it won't be perfect. Sometimes students, I call them Swiss cheese. They have holes in their learning, and they're sitting in class, and the teacher might be able to be explaining a concept, and they're looking at the teacher, and they look like they're paying attention, but they're really not. They're kind of in and out of focus. So when they go home to do the homework, they've got these holes in their learning, kind of like Swiss cheese. And so they know how to do some things and not other things. And so over time, they don't do their homework very well. And sometimes they may not do it at all because they have really weak skills. We see this a lot in cumulative subjects where one skill builds upon another, like math, a foreign language, and as students get older, a math-based science like chemistry and physics. So all of these things, whether you're overwhelmed, you're underprepared, you are kind of like Swiss cheese, what they have in common is weak executive function skills. So if this is happening in your home, the first way to solve it is to have a conversation with your child. It's not to say, hey, I went to this webinar and I'm going to show you all these strategies. It's really to sit down and talk to your child about what's going on, because communication is really where it's at. So just like we wouldn't barge into, our room and say to our kids, listen, we need to talk about this. We would kind of knock gently and say, can I talk to you now? Is this good? And when we're working with kids, even though parents might say, oh, I've got all these issues happening at home, we always tread gently. We never want to come and say, oh, we're going to do all of these things. We want to read the room. And so before we start offering a suggestion, we'll always say, and you might use some of these ideas in your home too, would you mind if I shared my thoughts on this? Would today be an okay day for us to look at this? Once we talk about a strategy, we might say, could this be a technique that you would actually use? So at home, what I would suggest is trying not to start questions with, did you? Because that often doesn't build a good rapport. Did you do your homework? Did you study for that test? Did you do those test corrections? Did you go and see your teachers? Those tend not to work for parents, and they don't work when we work with kids. We don't ask those questions either. Instead, we really try to normalize situations and say, you know what, this is a lot of kids are struggling with this. We have other 7th graders that are tackling these issues too. It's super normal. And we always try to empathize with our kids, just like you would as a parent. And I'll talk about that in a second, because if kids don't feel heard, they won't feel like they have the power to change. So we want to make sure that they feel empowered as well. And you can do that by using these really great words called I've noticed. So if your child is struggling in school, you don't want to come in with, did you do this? Did you do that? Or why did you get a C on your test? Or you said you were going to go talk to your teacher. Why didn't you do that? Or I just went onto your homework portal, your grade portal. I saw you have 5 overdue assignments. What's going on? Instead, you want to use these words, I've noticed. Let's take math, for example. I've noticed it's hard to stay on top of your math work. This sounds better to kids than you've got 5 overdue assignments. What's going on? This is ridiculous. Or I've noticed equations are really hard. Tell me about that. And the reason you want to say I've noticed is because all you're doing is observing something. And then you want to just earn trust. You want your child to talk to you, and you want to be a really good listener. And that's pretty much it. Oh, I get it. I totally understand. You're right. This stuff is really hard. I agree. Your teacher is a challenging teacher this year. So anytime we're helping kids with communication, it's strengthening relationships. And at the end of the day, we want to build communication with the students we work with and you with your own children, because we want our kids to come to us if they're really struggling in the future, not just about grades, but about other things that matter. We can also do this by asking open-ended questions and by saying things like, oh, I totally get it. Tell me more. Tell me why you might say that. Or if they're trying something new, how would it work if you did that? And then anytime we want to give feedback as educators and parents, we kind of want to eliminate blanket statements like, good job, but saying something specific. I love the way you came home and started on your math. I can tell you're working hard on that. What a good idea to put your phone on the other side of the room. Here's what one of our coaches used recently. That introduction really makes me want to read more of your paper. I thought that first point you made is really interesting. So when we help our kids, we want to make sure that if they're struggling with these things, that it's not just kind of like one and done. Like we don't want to just sit down with them once and have a conversation and assume all is good. Or we don't want to say, go see your teacher once about this so she can explain it to you, and then it's over. What we do know is that kids with weak executive function skills need a lot of consistent support. They need to be accountable also. So anytime we provide help for kids, what we found is that twice a week sessions are really ideal, or seeing the teacher twice a week, or getting help from somebody else, college student down the street. Those, getting that consistent support is ideal. The summer is also a great time to work on executive function skills. We have a program that we use with kids that's specifically for summer because the expectations are low in terms of other work that they have. People aren't stressed out, and you can really hone in on things that are important. But at the end of the day, preserving relationships is where it's at. Anytime we can have better communication with our kids and we can make it positive conversations, that's so much more important than, whether or not your child got a B- or a B in 7th grade history. Those things at the end of the day don't matter nearly as much as the relationship we have with our children. So as I wrap up, I'm going to go to Q&A in just a second, and I'll also go back and look at some of the things that parents said at the beginning when we came in. I want to let you know if we can support your child in any way, you just let us know. This is a QR code you can scan, and it will take you straight to our calendar. So Kathy, Jennifer, and Ann Stewart are our program managers who help parents of kids that have executive function skill challenges. So if you would just like to talk about your child to see how we can help, we're happy to chat with you. All right, so let's go to questions. And I also want to mention that there will be a survey that pops up at the end. And if you would be so kind as to answer that, that would be helpful for us as we plan future presentations. All right, so let me take a look at our Q&A and see. If you have a question, by the way, please throw it in the chat. All right, so let's see. I'd like to learn how to guide my daughter so she has strong skills in note-taking and planning her study schedule. What I might do, Virginia, is I shared with you Cornell notes-taking strategy. I might ask her, oh, Tell me about that. How do you take notes? Has that been helpful for you? Is it something that's when you're studying for a test you can use? How do you use that when you study for tests? And just kind of like trying to be a detective, trying to learn for her what has been helpful. To me, what I found with kids is there's a piece in any discussion called reflection that is really the most powerful thing. So when I say to kids, tell me about your note-taking technique. Has that been working for you? Do you like it? Has it been helpful? Hearing what they say to me is like gold, because then I can say, oh, so you found it to be helpful. That's awesome. How do you use that? I'm just curious. Or it hasn't been helpful. Tell me about that. What do you want to tweak about that in the future? Because when kids can reflect on what they're doing, it's really powerful for going forward. I don't purport to have all the answers. Every student is a little bit different. I first need to figure out what's happening. So those would be good questions to ask. Tell me about what you're using. Is it working? Do you find this to be helpful for you? Would you tweak this in the future? A lot of times, kids can solve their own problems just by having a conversation. Kelly says, would you recommend letting your child chill out after school before homework or getting straight to it? Kelly, what I found is that kids generally do need downtime. It's hard in Northern Virginia to have a schedule to say, oh, in our house, homework is going to start every day at 4:30, because every day is really different. And, one day you might be home, one day you might be at work. One day your child has lacrosse practice, another day they just come straight home after school. So you may not have to be able to have an exact schedule, but you could still have a routine. And you could have a routine like, okay, downtime for a half hour and then start your work. So, those things are sometimes a little bit easier to start in the fall because it's kind of fresh and new. But you could still have a conversation around it now and say, let's talk about, getting started on homework after school. But I found that most kids, sometimes if kids take medication for attention, sometimes getting straight to it after school is helpful before their medication's worn off. But in general, a lot of times kids do need a break. Let's see. I'd like to know how to support independence and self-advocacy. And thank you, Dana, for that question. So in general, if you've been helping your child a lot with schoolwork, now is the time to step aside and ask questions like, what do you have and when will you do it? Or what are your priorities tonight? And sometimes for some kids, especially those with some of these challenges I mentioned, you might need to help them get started. Oh, you have this? Let's take a look. What do you have? What will you need to get this done? Tell me about this assignment, and make sure they generally understand it and then walk away. So obviously at this age, we don't want to be sitting next to kids. We want them to be doing the work on their own. But for some kids, they do need help getting started. So in general, as much as we can put the ball in our kids' court and ask them those questions to get them going, that really tells them, you know what, I trust that you can do this. I'm here should you need support, but I have confidence in you that you can regulate your behavior to get this done. You might not have confidence they can get it done perfectly. That doesn't matter. What you're saying is, I have confidence that you can sit here and you can do this work. Let's see, how much study time should a sixth grader be doing every night? Well, I will tell you that in the old rule of thumb was kids should have about 10 minutes of homework per grade level per night. So a sixth grader should have about 60 minutes of homework. Now, included in that is studying. So they may not have that much homework, but studying is also included in that. Sometimes kids say, oh, studying, like if you say, do you have homework? and the kid says no, and you know that's not true because they have a test the next day. To some kids, that idea of studying doesn't equate to homework because they don't think that the teacher has actually assigned it. So you might also ask the question, do you have any tests or quizzes coming up? But that's the general rule of thumb. All right, let's see. I'm curious to know advice on how much to monitor my child when completing assignments versus letting him develop the skills to manage it on his own. I tend to lean on the side of letting him develop the skills and manage it on his own, because we're sending a message to our child that we have confidence that you can do that. And it is interesting to me. There have been lots of studies looking at parental involvement with homework, and this feels so contrary, but the more you help with homework, actually the less well your student will do. And it seems so weird to say that, because you would think that the more you help with homework, the better the student would do and the better their grades. But actually it diminishes their confidence and their motivation towards learning. And I'm not saying that that's what's going on in your house, but I'm just sharing that. So in general, again, asking them, what do you have? Let's take a look, and letting them do it on their own is really key to helping kids be independent later on. All right, let's see, anything else? I'd like to learn about what my child is studying. I get the messaging that there's no homework. How can I find out what information should be reviewed to monitor assignments? That should be on your student's portal. So if you log into Canvas or whatever LMS, their learning management system, you should be able to see a syllabus, what they're learning. I think that's what you're asking, how much, what information that, or what skills that they're learning. And then Angela, you also mentioned, I taught my daughter to use flashcards, but I'm curious as to other techniques. So flashcards are actually tried and true, and they really, really do work. I know they're old fashioned because we used them growing up, but there's a ton of research that flashcards are one of the most effective ways of studying. And that's why Quizlet is so wildly popular with kids. The problem with Quizlet, and a lot of kids do use Quizlet, it's their electronic flashcards, is that let's say you're taking 7th grade history. You can go in and you can find the flashcard deck that has already been created. But ideally, you're creating your own flashcard deck. I think I may have mentioned this before, because that's requiring your brain to work hard. You have to write out the word, you have to type in the definition. You can add auditory notes about it, you can add a picture, but then they're yours and you own them. And anytime you're practicing with your own information, that's really a lot better. Let's see. Na said, I love the Cornell notes. I'm going to use it for interviews at work. Oh, that's awesome, Na. I'm glad you found it to be helpful. What is the break between the Pomodoros? And the break, according to the research, is 5 minutes. So if a student is doing Pomodoros, they set the timer for 25 minutes. They also set the timer for their break of 5 minutes. And also with the Pomodoro, what I would recommend is using a physical timer. Although you can use your phone, sometimes the phone can, not sometimes, but typically the phone can be super distracting because a Snapchat will pop up, a group text message will pop up. So we encourage kids to put the phone on the other side of the room. And if that is super hard for you, just turn off your alerts or put it in airplane mode, because your timer will still work. All right. Do you have any suggested ways we can stay in touch with case carriers, teachers, or a student who needs support with executive function? Managing an agenda has been a challenge, and navigating Canvas can be overwhelming at times in creating priorities. Anita, I totally hear you. It's not an easy task. And if you have a child who is not naturally organized and they do not know what they have to do, and I had one of these kids in my own family, it is a lot of work, because you feel like this can kind of be a part-time job helping them navigate the system. I will say, as much as you can communicate with teachers, also use the words I've noticed and say, I've noticed Jimmy is struggling with this behind at home. This is what's happening, and tell them what's happening at home. Teachers often don't know. So if you can share, I'm having a hard time navigating this. He seems unaware. I'm not sure. How can I make this easier? That is really key in having open communication with teachers as much as possible, and finding, is there another way to go about filtering these assignments? But I would say reach out to teachers and see if you can set up a time to talk using the words I've noticed. How do you get kids who are bad at introspection, at least verbalizing, to open up? How do you get them to share what they're struggling with? Jason, sometimes kids will not be overly verbose with you. I've worked with lots of kids over the years where I'm asking these, I think, like really good questions, and I get things like, yeah, okay, yep, right. And it takes a while. It also takes a complete resistance on my part to judge them. So sometimes I'll say, tell me about this, and they'll give very short answers. And I might ask another question. So I'll ask it a couple of different ways. And I often say, I get it. I totally understand. And instead of continuing to ask questions, but maybe ask a couple of questions, sit back, hear what they say, can be really helpful. There's a book I can also recommend for that called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and How to Listen So Kids Will Talk. And there's also a teen version. So I would recommend the teen version. And all the books I've read on parenting, I personally think that is the best book on the market. It's been out for probably 25 years now, but it is the very best book on helping to have better communication with kids and getting them to open up. All right. Let's see. Catherine, do you recommend having kids do schoolwork over the summer to keep up learning? And the answer is if they need it. So typically we see this in cumulative subjects like math. If they're behind in certain areas, yes, I do. If it's just for busy work, then probably not. If they have weak executive function skills, then yes, because those are skills that they're going to need for the following year too. And James, is there any indication that the pandemic slowed executive function development amongst children? I have not seen, James, studies that show that, but I can tell you anecdotally, absolutely 100% yes. And if you talk to any teacher, they will tell you the same thing. Kids seem to be less focused. They're a little bit more impulsive. Their ability to monitor their behavior seems not like it was before. So my personal opinion is that it's going to take time, just like academics, to improve. But I do think kids will get back to it. It's just going to take time, and they're going to need a little bit more support at home than they may have needed otherwise. Kelly asked, does having a tutor make kids, I think we're over time, so I will stop on this last one. Does having a tutor make kids feel stigmatized? Sometimes kids do feel like, oh, why do I have to do this? However, I will say that once they get going and they develop a relationship with their tutor or their executive function coach, they learn the skills that make them feel so much better. And the relationship is so positive that feeling of, feeling like, oh, why do I have to do this, kind of goes away. Also, I can tell you, and where we live, it's so normal to have support. It's just kind of like part of what we do to support our kids. So I know that we've run over time. I'm so sorry to go over a couple of minutes. I hope everybody has found.
We're actually okay, Ann. We actually started half an hour early today because there were so many people interested. So we're okay. If you're okay to stay on, I can
absolutely stay on. Okay, let me go back to some of the questions then, and I'll make sure I get those. Okay, so okay, sorry. Okay, Virginia, Thank you for the note-taking suggestion. Are there resources to help teach a student how to take notes? For example, how not to write everything a teacher says, but to be able to distill the information into important points. And the website I mentioned on Learning Scientists showed kids how to create visual representations of everything. I would Google, there's so much good information out there. I would Google note-taking for middle schoolers and see what pops up. So what we've had good luck with is teaching kids. Sometimes we have kids that do that. They write everything and they get so far behind and they get upset. So we've taught them shorthand methods so that they have symbols for things that commonly occur, and they have a little key with their symbols. We've also found good luck with Cornell, because that prevents you from writing everything out. You really can't with Cornell. And I think it's How To has a really good video blog on different ways of taking notes. And so that might go to How To, and you can see people taking notes in the different ways of doing it. All right. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Melissa, for we have a blog on that, for taking better notes. James says, organizing a 3-ring binder, class folders, and papers also seems like a challenge this year. Yes, James, even before the pandemic, I found that 3-ring binders were just hard for kids in general. And if the teacher requires it, and your child has really struggled with it, I would ask the teacher, would an accordion folder be okay? Accordions are much easier for kids because you've probably seen them. They're like one big binder. You can even buy a small 3-ring binder with an accordion folder, but an accordion just has tabs. And so we have kids use accordions in one of two ways. One, if they have a lot of paper flow from a particular class, which they tend not to now because most things are electronic, but if they do, we'll have them buy a small accordion folder for the classes that they have a lot of papers. And we'll have them mark the tabs with how they want to organize it. Like, this is for notes, this is for study guides, this is for old tests and quizzes. And that accordion can be super helpful, because what happens with a 3-ring binder is kids are impulsive and they don't want to take the time to punch the paper, open up the rings, and put it in the right place. So what they ultimately do is they take the paper and they shove it in a packet in the pocket, or they just shove it in the folder or the binder, and the papers are everywhere and it's a complete mess. So when they have an accordion, all they have to do is to put it in the back of that section, and then the papers are already chronologically organized and you don't have to sort them in another way. All right. Na said, what about kids who are already doing well? Can we teach them these skills to get set up for high school success? And absolutely not. I mean, we work with a lot of kids that they're doing fine. I mean, they're, A and B students, but still things are, they could be doing better, or things sometimes are still hard for them. And what I found is in middle school, there's not a ton of, there's, obviously there are expectations, but the work isn't that hard yet. It's when they get into the latter years of high school and they're taking multiple AP classes or dual enrollment classes or IB classes that the work gets hard for them. So if they haven't learned study habits early on, it kind of hits them in the face like, oh my gosh, I got away with this before of doing minimal effort without good study habits, and now I can't really do that anymore. So that's why learning these skills now can really help kids later on. Susan said, how do you respond to the idea that actively helping your kid is too involved? I'm not sure, Susan, what you mean. It's okay to help your child. I don't mean that you shouldn't help your child if that's what you mean. Especially a student with ADHD, is gonna, when it comes to study habits, they're about, their skills are about 2 to 3 years behind a normally functioning student. So if you think about a sixth grader might have the skills to complete work like a third grader, you're naturally going to have to help them more. It's just kind of like part of it's just what is going to happen. And you can't say like, oh, you're in sixth grade, you should be able to do this by now. Yes, true. But the reality is, if your child has ADHD, that may not be where they are at that point. So we really do have to meet kids where they are. And if you've seen them fall down and fall apart because they cannot do these things on their own, then we just know as parents, we're going to have to intervene and help them. What we don't want to do is sit with them all the time, because then that sends a message, you can't do this on your own. So we want to really try over time to kind of step back a little bit so that they're able to function more independently. If you see a total disconnect with they cannot function at all without you, that's a sign that there's a mismatch between their curriculum and their abilities, and that is a conversation with the teacher. Do you think online tutoring is okay versus in person? And for executive function, absolutely. We did in person for 20 years. And during the pandemic, we did everything virtually. And I was the biggest skeptic. And I thought, oh, this is never going to work. Like, how are kids going to focus online? And it is true. In a large group of 25 kids, it's incredibly hard for kids to focus online. But in a one-to-one environment where technology is used in a very engaging way, it works beautifully. And it also enabled us to see kids more frequently. And that is the frequency of helping with executive function skills is like really the magic. It's not as much whether it's in person or not. It's how can I, instead of seeing you once a week, I'd rather see you twice a week for shorter sessions. That moves the needle more than, whether I'm in person or not, than once a week. And then Catherine says, how do you suggest handling distressed kids who are to the point of walking away? How do you suggest handling kids distressed to the point of walking away from work? So I'm not sure if the student wants to walk away or you want to walk away. But somebody once said, this friend of mine who's a behaviorist, she once said to me, hey, look, if you think you're about to get into a power struggle with your kid, you are already in the power struggle. So if it's already gotten to the point where there's so much friction that you want to walk away or your kid wants to walk away, it might be that, that there should have been disengagement before that. So oftentimes when I'm, even with my own kids, when I was working with them, and I could see that, especially my youngest son with ADHD, that he was getting super frustrated before it got to the point of like utter frustration. Oh, okay. Thank you, Catherine. It's sad that they don't know something. Before it gets to the point of like feeling really down and sad, I might say, you know what? I can tell this is super frustrating. Let's put this aside and shift gears, take a break and work on this. Or, you know what? You're right. This is really hard. I can tell how difficult it is. Let's have a snack, or why don't we have dinner and tackle this later on? Anytime we can give kids a break to kind of reframe, it's better than trying to power through it. If your child's really sad about something, they're super frustrated, unless they're at the very end of it, powering through it just often creates more tension or more frustration. So I might take a break and then come back to it a little bit later. So Na, I think unless you have any questions, I'd love to turn it back over to you. And if nobody has any other questions, we can definitely wrap up.
Super. Well, this was gold. We've all been texting and saying, oh my gosh, this is amazing. First of all, I really want to thank you for joining us tonight. I want to thank the parents, particularly the ones that are still here. And can we all just say, thank God we made it through school without these study skills? I was like, how how am I here with like finishing school without all these skills? So I think this is great. I think we would probably love to have you back next year. This would have been so great at the beginning of the school year. And so yeah, do you see all the applauses that are coming up?
Thank
It's very
you.
cute. So yeah, so thanks to everybody, and we will be back next month, and we will send out the slides, the recording. Yeah, I think that's it. But yeah, thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next month. Bye.
Have a great night. Bye, everybody.